when the sky fell down. 'Cause I didn't feel the world stand still. Now I'm stepping over stars on the ground. 'Cause without you here, nothing else feels real. And I don't know where we are, but we're not where we're supposed to be. And I don't know where to start, 'cause without you...
Getting our packets, updates, etc. We can talk about that as well. Basically, in the 16 years I've been doing this, the packets, the staff presentation has stayed the same. So kind of you get used to slogging through it for the complicated cases. So haven't really thought about changes over the years. So it's been interesting to think about the last couple of days. So with that introduction, Jocelyn, take it away.
Thank you, Chair and Commissioners. Yes, just some background. So really, it wasn't like a series of complaints necessarily that prompted the conversation, just I think a bunch of different things. You know, at our last meeting, we had the legal training, or a couple meetings ago, and then that made me start thinking about, well, maybe it's a good time to just kind of refresh and look at everything, and really as staff's role to support the commission, you know, are there things that you guys have had on your, like, not necessarily a big deal, but you're like, oh, I wish we had tables to show us what the criteria was, or I'm making stuff up, or, you know, what are some things that staff can do to help make your job easier to understand, whatever ideas on any process, or staff can use the packet, or the time frames, or anything really that we could do to enhance how we're bringing information to you guys, is really what the idea was. So with that, we didn't really have any preconceived notions about this. We did have some attachments to give you some examples of some both legislative, so some zoning code updates. That was one of the examples, and then also just some cases for the quasi-judicial, a bigger one and then a smaller one, and just really went up and down there. So with that.
Well, after 20 years worth of doing reports like this, to me, one of the things that's significantly missing for me is there's never any letters of availability in the packet. There's nothing from the Public Works that says that access and development is potential based on this. Nothing from water, nothing from sewer, nothing from Excel saying we can serve these people.
So generally not that this is, but generally how we've been doing it right now is kind of a summary, and we answer those questions about if we had gotten referral comments back from any of our reviewers, because certainly all of that stuff is sent out to water and fire and Public Works and Excel, and we receive information back, and we were just summarizing it in the paragraph is generally, since I've been here, the approach that we've been taking.
But it's often that those companies need to tell us. There needs to be some follow-up that says, we need to know, can you serve these people? I mean, we're approving something that Excel will come in and say, it's going to cost $200,000 to get a line there.
Generally, each project that comes before you at that stage, whatever that stage is, we've done what the code requires relative to review agencies. It may not have the documentation in there, but like I said, it's usually done in a paragraph in the actual report. But usually that could be on page 50 of, 70 pages. I'm not saying that it's right, wrong, bad, or good, but the information, that's how we have been presenting it to date.
Are you hinting that you'd like to see the actual referral letter rather than a summary?
In my past, I've always included the referral letters.
Yes.
I'm not asking for that. I want a section that you have the criteria they're dealing with. Well, one of those criteria is utilities. So there should be some place that it always shows up, not a summary somewhere. But under utilities, it just shows up and says, these reported, and have, indicated that these can be served.
So you're saying like a category. Right now, we
Right.
just have it as a paragraph under staff analysis.
Right.
So
But it
an
doesn't
actual
tell me
category.
anything. It doesn't tell me that staff went out and that those letters went out. It doesn't tell me that these people didn't answer you. It only says.
Right,
these-
maybe it's not
these-
as consistent as we have. We have in some cases, but maybe it's not highlighted of a section of the staff communication that says referral agencies.
Maybe it could be in a
Right.
chart format rather than a, 3 paragraphs rather than 1 paragraph. It could be a little chart, and then you just, check mark, yeah, they responded, no response, or give the highlights.
Even approved or
One at a
disapproved.
wider street because
Yeah.
of fire protection, something like that.
Yeah, there just seems, there's a lot of what the applicant has supplied. But what I find missing and that concerns me is there's nothing of the city's support documentation in there. What they have gathered from Public Works and from the utility companies and such. So what we're going on is, these people were notified. But we're not going on that they can serve them, unless that's what they've specifically said. But we can't verify that because the way that the summary reads is, we heard from Excel, no problem.
So maybe we could be more clear, but that's what that means, is that there's no issue. That means that yes, they were able to serve them and that there's no issue with this application.
And that would be fine, and if there are conditions, we should know what those conditions are.
Yes, again, depending on what application is in front of you and what is
Right.
appropriate.
Now, I understand certainly that things aren't
But
finalized with us.
Yep.
More than 1 page, maybe it's too much, just a summary chart. let's say.
Summary is fine,
But you just fill in the blanks every time. And if case B doesn't have need any response from fire protection, fine, you just,
Not applicable.
NA,
I mean, if you had a chart with, about 5 or 6 things, just say Excel, yes, no, conditions, and if there are any.
Right.
I would be a happy camper. But right now, I don't know what's
So
going on.
for example, on the attachment that was in your packet about Southridge, we actually did have a section in that one, but I agree it's not always consistent. It does say referral responses. So within that then.
And I didn't have any
identify some
responses
of those.
to refer to. You identify things, but there's no place for me to go with it. That's all I'm asking for, is just to know yes or no it was handed in.
Yeah, so we could probably you're saying restructure that a little bit so it's clear.
Well, it's just such a critical piece that I've seen projects get approved, not here, but I've seen projects get approved where it is $200,000 to bring in the line and the project can't go forward.
Well, generally for a rezoning at that stage, right, we're not in that.
But that's subdivision that I'm talking about more than anything else.
So maybe make that a little bit more specific, what you're saying, and a little bit more detail in that. Okay. All right. Got it?
Next.
I might just write down some bullet points. I think timing is sufficient for me in terms of getting it out the week before. I really like the public availability and the availability to us on iLegislate and also attached to the agenda that's on the public site. I think that's important. It's helpful for us to be able to access anywhere, but also for the public, I think it's clear and available, which is good. In terms of content, tables, graphs, data, images, things like that, summary type information is always helpful and valuable, especially when we want to refer back to things. I personally don't like printed copies, both for environmental and cost considerations, but having more tables and graphics makes it easier to remember where things are as you're scrolling through on the iPads and the content. The summaries in the hearings, the staff summaries, tend to be just reading or regurgitating what's in the legislative text. I think that's a good opportunity to give more of summary analyses and tie things back more to the reasons for your analyses and recommendations, which I always appreciate reading and seeing. But I don't know if that's more for public comment and public benefit, which is good, but I think it's safe to assume that we've at least read the material beforehand, and so just reading excerpts from the legislative text isn't tremendously value added, at least to me as a commissioner. And I do appreciate the analyses and summaries with references before you make recommendations. I think that's good. In terms of format, it's a lot of, I know it's a lot of work on your part, and it's often a lot to read, but I think that the content is there. If we can just summarize it more graphically and with tables, as you previously suggested, that would help me not only in the review ahead of time, but also in the meetings, being able to reference back to stuff without going to printed copy.
Yes, one thing that our software system is going to be forcing us to do is to, because that is a huge, sometimes in those big hearing cases, in the text is one gigantic, massive document that seems to be blowing up the Granicus legislative system. So we definitely are working towards, trying to create a simplified staff communication and then have more attachments, if you will, with some of the details. So maybe on if a simplified staff communication is more of the summary, and there's an opportunity to put a table in there of, just some of the high points, and then referring it, the detail then, to an attachment or along those lines. So we definitely will be making some tweaks. But yeah, good point.
And then I know you'll hear from everyone else here, which is great, but I'm curious to know if you have gotten feedback, public feedback on format or content, and if that was part of what spurred this conversation, or...
Not necessarily. Certainly over the time I've been here, I've definitely had communication with community members about just trying to understand how to read the staff communications and the attachments. So I think the more we can make it user-friendly to the commission and the public, certainly benefits everyone. So.
Yeah, totally agree. And one thing that you might do to that end to help not only commissioners but also the public is to link to have live links to city code and even the citywide plan, because those are available online. So you could link and bookmark to those particular sections so that people could read those in context and link to the actual code page.
Yeah, if we could, surely there's a way to figure it out. That's a good,
As
much as we can to make it easily accessible, right, is the point.
As an attached staff report instead of the actual Granicus staff communication, it would be easier. So this new method of having the executive summary go through the program, I have a hard time when it's in Granicus itself doing live links. But if it's a Word document or a PDF that has live links in it as an attachment, I can do that. So that actually would be better than to have it as an attached staff report as opposed to all that information in a page.
Well, and the public doesn't have access to Granicus, but they do have access to the webpage and the PDF links that you upload. And so I think that's, if not equally important, more important than...
All right.
Good idea.
I have some similarities. I found that funny. The first thing on my list was just what Brian was saying, how much I really appreciate, the maps, the charts, and the pictures in any way that you can summarize. Sometimes when you have the charts, like you were saying, and there's one side and we're comparing them, those are so appreciated when those are there. It's just really easy for comparison and reference. The other thing that I really like is when you have a detailed background. We have the section on the background. That's really helpful to bring up to speed to what's going on for things that might have been going on for decades. So I really appreciate those very much.
May I ask you a question?
Yeah.
So that's reminding me of, we've kind of started evolving this a little bit more, but we've been definitely pretty good about detailed background on a property if there's any previous land use approvals. But usually by the time whatever the hearing case is in front of you, usually it's gone back and forth in a lot of iterations, before it's in front of you, because most applicants want to come forward with a recommendation of approval. So usually there's a lot of back and forth before you get to that point. So a couple times we started adding a little blurb about kind of where the application started, you know what I mean? And some of the big topic items that we had them address to get it to you. So it means maybe some structure around kind of where they started and what are the big ticket items that they needed to work out before it even got to you. That might be helpful, or I don't know if that's
For me,
necessary.
I'm a detailed person. I appreciate that information because for me it gives a better picture of what's going on, what's already been done, what's already been hassled out. And, so then when I'm looking at it, it's like, oh, they've taken care of this, this is what their conclusion was, then you get that. So again, I'm a detail-oriented person. I like to have that type of information, see what other people think.
Okay, thanks. I just wanted to clarify what you meant, detail and background, so thank you.
Yes. For me, timing is important. I believe they're supposed to come out on Thursday night, and the reason I like that is if I have a chance to go over it Thursday night, then Friday I can call you guys with my questions. Or for me, I want to have the site plan printed out because it's too small. I can't look at the whole site plan on our little tablets here. So I like to have those printed out. Of course, Denise already knows that. So if it comes on Friday, then I might not be able to know when it comes and I can't get my questions answered that I would like to while the staff was in session. And then by the time Monday comes, I'd really like to be better prepared than calling you guys on Monday. So for me, the Thursday night is extremely helpful. I also find it helpful that whenever there's a plan that's being discussed or part of the process, whether it's a neighborhood plan or more detail, like when we were doing the stuff with Santa Fe, to have them included in our packet. Sometimes they're not all included. There might be one missing, and it's not that I can't go find it, but I like to have it on, on our tablet because then I can access it when we're in the meetings and I don't have to print something out and bring it with me. So any of the plans that are a part of the process, I really appreciate the attachment. Or link, whatever easiest for you, as long as I can access that. The other thing that would be really nice, and it's something that I believe Brian mentioned, is references. So we'll talk about a piece of code, the one that we were talking about where you talked about assisted living and nursing. I'd like the code reference right next to it. So, and say assisted living, in our code 10- whatever. So that way I can go find it right away. I mean, I can go on the website and find it, but this way I'm making sure that I'm on the exact page that you are talking about. Does that make sense? Yeah, just
More
to
of a live
reference.
link connection to that section is what you're
Yeah,
saying.
and even if I just have the actual code, the code reference, I can go back to it. So even when you're talking about, the one that talked about the, general plan or PD, just to have the reference of where that is in code, that's it. And then I can go to code and find it myself, of course. Does that make sense? Oh, and also, and I'm sure you've thought of this, is at our meeting with the lawyers, where they talked about when we don't approve something, we have to go on to either deny it or continue it, just to add that to our motion section. Just what we had discussed at that last meeting. So like if we go through and we don't approve something, but we haven't denied it, then we have to go through the process of either denying it or continuing it, like at the meeting we had, just to have that in that motion section.
So
Does that make sense?
I think we have generally, now this may not be,
They should be there.
what, they should.
You have each of those that you can either approve, deny, or continue. That's there, but I'm just thinking maybe on that, just as, and maybe that's not necessary, I can leave this up to Mark, but if we have that, don't forget to deny if you haven't approved, or continue.
So it would be a fourth motion to deny if we haven't approved it.
No, I think what she's saying is something that tells us not to forget to go
A
through the
reminder of
process.
some sort.
Right.
Yeah.
Maybe that's more, one of the things we have is that handout of procedures, right, of running the meeting, and maybe that's a reminder down that we have a handout that we give everyone on, here's what happens each step, and then you make a motion, and maybe that's kind of in the cheat sheet, if you will, that kind of says, if you deny it here, remember you have to do the next step or something like that.
Yeah,
But I
that's
see what you
more
mean, there's that
close.
introduction paragraph before the 3, and it says planning commission has the opportunity to approve of conditions or whatever, I could add another bold statement that just says, and if a motion does not pass, be sure to put forward a new motion or something like that.
If it's not approved, you need to either deny or continue, just like we had talked about.
Right, it's just
That
where
was
does
my
that
thought.
fit, right? Is that a thing that should be in the staff communication, or is that more just for us as a procedural note on that handout that everyone gets at the dais about things?
Laminated handout.
Yeah.
Whatever you just think is fine.
Yeah. so that's
Procedural,
good.
because you're not just, you may not have the potential just to deny, it may be approved too. I mean, you may not have had sufficient to approve, so then you have to do another vote, but it isn't, you're not gonna say, we're gonna vote to deny now, because that's what has to be, I mean, do you understand what I'm saying?
Right, you just need another motion that actually passes of some sort.
Give some decision.
Right, the decision was made.
Yes,
It
right,
wasn't
make a
left
decision,
hanging.
right. Yeah.
Right, there finally was
Right.
enough people to agree on one of the other three.
Right, and however that looks best is fine. This last one, I'm not quite sure how this looks, but so the way our code is set up, we don't work by project, we work by land use, right? So they'll bring a picture of how they're thinking they might use the land, right? So we get a pretty picture of, this is what I'd like to do with it if we rezone it, add this land use, do the PDO, they'll bring their picture forward. But I think that in some ways distracts from the fact that we are based on land use. And so while they might say that this is what we want to do, it doesn't mean it's what they have to do. And sometimes what they'll do is they'll have more open space in the picture, but they only have to do a lesser amount that's actually on the site plan. What I'd like to see is something showing that, and this is where I'm not really sure how to
No,
express it.
I can help you. Because there was an example, I agree, it came to staff's attention that actually the illustrative plan, right, that's going along, let's say with a rezoning, came in and it didn't actually meet the performance standards or the open space specifically requirement that they were proposing and putting forward. So since that came to my attention, it is a requirement if you're going to show a picture, it must meet the standards that you're proposing based on that project in front of you.
And
So,
somehow I'd like
right,
our
that-
conversations to really hone in on land use. This is how the land, so because we don't base it on projects, like they show us what project they, what they're thinking of doing. But so something happens and they sell the land and then somebody else builds something on it. That project is now meaningless, right? But our land use is, how does that land use going to affect our community no matter who actually builds it or owns it?
Right, so usually it's a land use component and then it's a performance standards, right? Because
Yes.
in those rezonings, so that's what I'm saying, that generally what the intent is, but I agree, pictures can get us kind of sidetracked, but
Yes.
the intent is that graphic that they're presenting as part of their case recently came to my attention that wasn't an accurate representation based on what they were asking. So first we've said, no. Anyone presenting some version of a graphic that's representing what they could build based on a performance standards in that application must actually adhere to those standards that they're proposing. So that'll help on one level, but I agree with you. What you're saying is to make sure that we're talking about the uses
Yes.
and any of the uses that are saying that they want to allow when it's like a rezoning, for example, right? And how that impacts.
Right, and the performance, like you were saying, so that we don't get so focused on this person's going to build this, because we don't know that. And that's not what we are approving. We are approving, like you're saying, whether it's the land use, the rezone, the performance, whatever that's what we're approving. So that would be very helpful to me. That's it.
Okay, Bruce? Oh, you want to go second to last? Okay.
I'd go either way.
John, you're up, John.
Okay, I'm up. Well, appreciate the opportunity to provide some feedback to staff communications and reports. My comments have mainly to do with the reports. And once I read the summary of the agenda for tonight, I recalled this planning from March 2017 article that I wrote about improving staff reports. And I really liked that article when I read it. And I'm glad I remembered it because I went back and reread that. And especially the concept of adding a one-page introduction, or what do they call it, a cover page, to the staff reports. Now, some of your staff reports may only be 3 pages long, so that might be modified, but for the robust ones, which would be most similar to maybe the Southbridge as far as your examples, this format in the article was really, really helpful, I thought. So I made some copies for you guys.
Oh, yeah, we have it.
You have this.
We can make sure to get it to the commission, yep.
Yeah, I would really, really think
Yep.
this would improve our process because it really boils it down to one page. You don't have to go dig in and see, page 50 for the table or something. It's like it brings it all forward, including the, compatibility of the comp plan, the summary of any kind of zoning changes or.
So you're saying what you really like about that, I get the detail, but it's more about that it provides a summary of kind of the big, I'm just trying to get at what do you like about.
I just
maybe
like
what is
that it's a format, it's a very specific format that pulls all the pertinent information so that if a planning commissioner fell asleep and didn't realize his planning commission meeting, could take this out and read this, and there'd be, in some cases, the planning commissioner may only have time to read one page.
One-page executive summary, basically, is what you're saying.
Exactly. And so I think it's a best practice for a staff report. And then the article goes on to summarize key points. The 5 key points of the strategies, it said the number 1 was make the cover page count. And that's what this article really does. I think it really nailed it on the head. And again, other comments that were things that Brian and Robin mentioned. But I think that would be a huge improvement in the format of the reports, because your reports have the information there. But I find myself going back and forth, looking for stuff, and it takes more time to pull it out. Whereas this specific format just would be a huge time saver. I think it would need to be modified to the other types, like for the dock design guidelines or your Lee Gulch open space rezoning. It's definitely going to have less information in these. So maybe one could be done for, development proposal or,
Different templates, what you're saying.
and then others could be done for title changes, code changes that are somewhat less complex, or less information, less pages. So, but I've got a couple examples of this. I'll pass around. So you can see that's the example of that cover page. And then here's the whole report. I'm keeping my copy of this issue.
Yeah, you know what? Honestly, we went back and forth as to whether or not to include that for this evening's conversation, and then just wanted to leave it more, didn't want to predispose and focus you guys in a certain way, but appreciate the information.
Could you make a copy of this and put it in an email to all of us?
Yes. Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
Did you put it in a public record?
So as we also know, we definitely, based on how we've been doing study sessions, anything that we talk about this evening, we will post that tomorrow to the video and the meeting minutes, or their own minutes, but what is it called, Denise? To this night's.
The journal, I'll end
the
up doing
journal.
an attendance and then I'll attach it.
So, but just for this.
John, anything else?
That's it.
Okay. Bruce?
I agree with pretty much everything that my colleagues have brought up. I think the exec summary is great. I think the bullet points are great. I think some project background I think would you're talking about is very similar to a lot of the stuff that I was angling towards as well. Couple maybe embellishments beyond what's been discussed. John's right, the information's all in here. One of the things that has been interesting over some period of time is when you read some of these documents, and you guys are close to it, you're closer to it than we are, and sometimes I think it's hard to do the step back and just sort of answer the sort of substantive why questions on a couple of things. So just for example, on the Louthan Street document, there's a paragraph or a sentence in here that says, the neighborhood asked for information beyond what is typically included in design guidelines and which is beyond the city's purview, so the additional information such as paint colors is provided as voluntary guidelines and identified as such in the introductory text for that section. So just rereading that paragraph, the first thing that came to my mind is why? You know, why is it beyond the city's purview? Why is that not something that can be, why can't paint colors be included in a design guideline? I don't need an answer. It wasn't about answering it.
Right. And
But
that's specific to that project in a grant that we got. So, but it wasn't because you can't have a design guideline
Right.
on color. That wasn't it. I just want to make sure that's clear.
No, which is fine. It wasn't about that particular issue specifically, but just invariably when there's something in here, we will read it, and then it either ends up being something we have to come to you to say, well, you know, why?
Right.
Or it gets raised in a meeting, and if as you guys are reviewing these things before the packet is distributed, it can be looked at from the standpoint of are there obvious why questions in here that maybe some information could be supplied. There's always going to be stuff that somebody comes up with that is just out of left field. You know, it's always that way. But you might look at that as some idea or an opportunity to sort of answer a handful of questions that maybe would beg a question. A couple years ago, I had an opportunity at work to sit through a land use decision in another community, and we were trying to get a store located, and there was an argument over who had the right to cite a store where only one store could be cited, to make a long story short. But I went to the Planning Commission, and then I went to the City Council. This in particular was in Westminster. They actually, I thought, did a very credible job of lining out the elements of the decision-making process. At the time, I gave a copy of the whole presentation to the city manager and said, at some point, you may want to look at this or talk to them, or for your purposes, one idea might be to sample what other communities do and cherry pick the best ideas. I mean, everybody does this stuff a little bit differently. But if you take a handful of communities, you know, Lakewood, Westie, Arvada, Centennial, I don't know, you pick them. You might get a few ideas like, oh, I didn't know they did, you know, that's an interesting way of addressing that issue. Maybe nothing says I respect you like plagiarism, right? I mean, we could do that, you know, if somebody else has a good idea, there's nothing that says we can't adopt it, is what I'm saying. For some period of time as well, there's been requests or at least comments made on some of these things about maybe putting some element of pro and con statements in there, and maybe it goes to your comment about sort of the recommendation and so forth. I mean, the recommendations are in there, but it sort of, again, begs the question, if you guys are digesting all of the information that's in these documents, so for example, you know, what we did on the Southbridge plan development, I mean, there's you know, a lot of information in here, buku information. You came up with a recommendation as staff that said, here's what we're recommending based on all the information and the staff documents and so forth and so on. But a little bit of flavor in terms of, we kind of like these things, we maybe didn't like these things, or this is a pro, this is a con, or you might think about, here's items in support of this project, here's a few items that aren't in support of this project, you can weigh them, this kind of thing. That's helpful flavor. I think it's helpful for us. More to the point, I'll get to that point in a minute, but I think it's helpful broadly speaking, because it's you guys had to do that to get to the recommendation. I mean, the Planning Commission has to digest it all and render a decision that's consistent from a legal standpoint, if it's quasi-judicial.
Well, yes, and that's the concern I was going to raise here. If zoning in this state were legislative, that would be very workable. But in Colorado, zoning has been defined to be quasi-judicial.
Right.
So you're limited to the record. And the record generally isn't necessarily going to have pros and cons. It's going to have all of the information that staff has collected on the property. Now, staff can certainly outline both positive and negative recommendations. But unlike a legislative process, which is going to have that, in a quasi-judicial process, you're not.
And I understand it's evidence presented, and I get that the record is what we're rendering a decision upon. But to the extent that the staff recommendation is in the record to begin with, because all of these things come with a recommendation.
Yes.
They're implicitly saying we've looked at the code and the plans, the neighborhood plans, comp plan, and so forth and so on, corridor studies, and we think this particular project is consistent with and should go forward as a result of everything we've seen that's in the code. But it's not always black. I mean, it's never black and white. It's almost always, could go either way.
Well, and if you have things in the record that would suggest a different recommendation, that's totally appropriate.
Okay.
It's just that staff cannot go beyond the record. For staff to go beyond the record is contrary to the structure that Colorado has in zoning.
And I agree with that. I have no issue with that. I guess where I was going was what you said then is positive or negative recommendation elements, perhaps, is the way to describe it, subject to your discretion.
And to the extent we can do that within the record, we can certainly do that.
Okay. The other thing I was going to throw out was, Robin mentioned sort of a project background, which I think is good as applicable. The other thing that I think is interesting, and again, you guys deal with this every day, we deal with it as a body frequently enough to where we understand it and yet can come up with new items per that, the conversation we had with Steve concerning, you have to have a motion to deny as opposed to just not approve kind of thing. So that was actually, learned something new at that meeting. It wouldn't be the worst idea if it's not inconsistent with what Steve was saying about the record, to have a paragraph in here somewhere that talks about the decision-making context. So for example, if it is a rezone, what are the contextual elements of a decision to change a zoning land use? And essentially you have to find that it's, it's in the code, obviously, 10- whatever. And it has to be consistent with the comprehensive plan and so forth and so on. And somewhere there's a statement that says if it's not consistent with the comprehensive plan, it either has to be change of use or an error, reversal of an error, that kind of thing. All of that's interesting information, but I think lining that out up front in the executive summary, certainly for the public broadly, people who are looking at this stuff, and as a refresher for us, I'll take it, right? I've read through enough of these things where I sort of think I'm going in a direction and then have to go back and revisit, what exactly is the context we're dealing with here in order to say, okay, I got to focus on these elements, maybe less so on those elements-ish.
So So I've been thinking about this too, and just to make sure I understand. So in the beginning of staff communications, we kind of say like, here's where it is in the process. So it seems like we do an okay job of identifying that, but you're saying like, what's the decision around what you're making? You know what I mean? What is, is that what you're saying? Like, give us a little bit more detail so it says, okay, here's where you are in the process, but what are the elements of the decision making for that?
I think so.
Is that what you're saying? Yeah, see, that's what I was wondering.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think what it basically is trying to orient towards is, you know, if you're coming in off the street and you want to see the meeting, or, you know, if you're one of the scout troops that comes in, hypothetically, you hear all this stuff, but you don't really understand why this is going on. And it's only, you know, a step better if you're the public and you sort of understand what's generally happening with a land use decision. And it's a little better for us because we sort of do enough of them to where we get it, but we can certainly use a refresher. And by the time it gets to you three, you sort of understand it implicitly. And so you never really get into it from a context standpoint because you just know that's how the process works. But the process context is always, I think, sort of an interesting, useful, should say, tidbit of information in order to try to level set everybody's expectations so that when they're sitting there watching it either in person or on television or on a computer, they sort of understand why the discussion is taking place, why we're focusing on certain attributes. It's because it's within the context of this is a land use decision. It's, you know, it's quasi-judicial. Here are the attributes of what the code stipulates. You know, at a real high level, but just so people can say, okay, yeah, I get what they're doing. I'll stop there. I think a lot of the rest of the stuff, you know, the visuals and so forth and so on are good. You know, I think John was right. I mean, the information's all in there. I mean, you can read through the stuff, and it's you know, the detail is all there. I think what you're down to is there a more efficient way of organizing it? And I mean, I liked what you initially said was from the standpoint of, you know, let's do summary, let's do a high level. You know, if you want more details, you know, you go down into the document, or you can link to the code of the plan or the study or corridor study or whatever. You know, so I think that's good.
I'd like Bruce, your comments on the process, and I think not avoid taking the opportunity to educate as well as state the facts in the staff report. And that education may sometimes, you know, be something that planning commissioners or, you know, they have that information, but the general public may not. And so that adding that in what may not take a lot of extra words can add a lot of clarity.
Thanks.
Okay. Well, probably like many of you, this is how I look at my packets. I breeze through it as fast as possible. I end up saying, what the heck's going on? But then I've seen some maps, I've seen some charts, I've read the description, then I go back and read it again and start making notes, and then probably go back and read it a third time. But it takes a while to slog through sometimes 15, 20-page staff report. So that's how I normally do it. It's not a one-shot deal. Let's start by saying timing. I would prefer that the packets come out Wednesday. You mentioned Tuesday. I'd like Wednesday at least. That gives us time, like you say, a day or two to look at it and call staff if we have any questions. And by the way, asking staff questions becomes part of the public record and goes out to all commissioners as well. So I'd like to see it at least Wednesday, if not before. Obviously, you got your deadline's always Friday, but you know, by noon or so, let's make it sooner, and just have to ask the applicant for more information sooner. Good things I like good things plus maybe ways of improving them slightly. There's 4 or 5 items here. One is I love the process description that we now have, meaning the applicant, and then there's the staff. Maybe it goes to historic preservation. Then it comes to the planning commission. Either we're the final arbiter, or then it goes to council. I'd like every staff report should include the process. clearly spelled out, so we and the public will know where we are, where it's going next. Zoning comparison charts. I love the charts versus long paragraphs. I think a chart could save a lot of paragraph forming and trying to be Hemingway here. Let's do a chart. Get a lot more information in a smaller amount of space. I also like original site development plans. Say, Southbridge there was something from 1978, I think it was. Very handy to have. Sometimes you can bug in and look at the criteria as part of that sheet as to open space requirements, setbacks, access. So it's always good to get the history behind a site from 78 or 68 or whatever, and then as what they did with Southbridge is you had a list of what happened in 78, 79, 83, 89, 98. Very handy to have. So now we have some history, some background here. So we're not just deciding in a vacuum. We've got some history behind us. I love, increasingly in the last few years, there's more maps, there's more pictures, more diagrams, there's more charts. Very good. Versus dry biscuit, just spouting words here. Also, diagrams, for instance, in a very difficult case, and you're trying to discuss height differentiations or height interpretations, be maybe better than trying to go through half a page. Just have a small picture. I call it a cocktail napkin sketch of here's the height issue. It'd save a lot of words here. Again, more illustrations, maps, photos would be awesome. Let's see. I've already mentioned the history. Second, maybe changes that I'd like to see is on complicated submittals. Somebody mentioned the link. I always would like to see a link to the traffic study. Sometimes they can go into 60 to 80 pages, but on a difficult, complicated case, it's nice to know that right-hand left is doing this to that area, and right-handed or southbound right or southbound left is doing something else. So for many years now, we haven't been given these traffic reports, and I assume they're required of the applicant. And you give maybe a quarter-page summary, but sometime, say, in a complicated case, make a link. Okay. I wouldn't mind a little more description of what happens during the neighborhood meetings. There's always just maybe 2 or 3 sentences. Yes, the applicant held neighborhood meetings. It'd be nice to know how many people showed up. Apparently there are some attachments sometimes, comments from the public, but a little more information as where it was, how many people showed up, etc. The third item I just gleaned from what other people have been talking about here the last few minutes, and that is...
I'm sorry, Mark, just so I'm making sure, just stepping back, just so we don't lose anything. So on the neighborhood meeting, I think we've generally kind of put some who came, when they held it, and if there's a sign-in sheet, we have the applicant make a copy of that so we have all of that information. But you're saying, in addition to that, you'd like to have kind of the high points or what are the general gist of the input was?
Yes.
So is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay, just so I'm
without going
understanding.
into 10 pages, I mean, okay, half a page, just a real general synopsis. Now, there's a chance for bias to come in if you're personally pro or con for the project, but try to keep it fair.
Because right now, staff does not attend any of those, so we would ask the applicant to add that into what they provide us for documentation.
Staff doesn't go to those meetings?
No, we do not.
Okay, I didn't know that.
So we could ask in our requirement, when we ask the applicant to give us the detail of their neighborhood meeting, generally we've gotten high things of number of people, the date, and then if there's a sign-in sheet, whoever came, like that's a photocopy. But we haven't really done a lot as far as consistent about content and what was really discussed at this meeting. Some people have provided that, but certainly not all of the applications.
Yeah, haven't provided
So,
that. Obviously, it's not appropriate for us to go to those meetings once the application is made, as we are quasi-judicial. The third item, again, I gleaned from other people's comments the last few minutes, is a mild criticism of staff, and I call it planner speak, right to your audience. You can understand it, I could slog through it and eventually understand it, but can the public understand it? I could understand it easier. We all have different professions here. Right to your audience. Let's see. A couple of things I did like from a few items highlighted from what others mentioned that I agree with. The links to the city plan, to the link to the code, etc. Very, very good idea. Code reference right next to the item. That's again another link right there. That's also good. The executive summary at the beginning, that makes a lot of sense. And I love the one about cherry picking other staff reports. Have you ever picked up a staff report from Golden?
Absolutely. That's how we do it all the time. Right? That's the best way to do it, right? Best practices instead of reinventing the wheel.
No copyrights in government boards.
That's right.
Well, just as I steal other details from other architects and from magazines, it happens all the time. Okay. Anyway, that's I think all my comments about the staff reports. Anybody else, anything else? And we're going to move on to staff communications a little bit. Anyone else?
I have one question about the neighborhood meeting. When the public comes to these neighborhood meetings, do they know that their personal information or their attendance could become part of a public record? Is that disclosed to them? Because I've seen sometimes where their name and phone number or name and address and some of that personal information, I don't know if they would necessarily want that public information out there when it becomes part of the public record. It feels like that should be just a disclosure thing to the public when they come.
Right.
Could you
Whether
give
we
them
black it out of whatever
Well,
the
certainly
contact
their name
was.
is part of the public record,
Yeah.
only personal identifying
It's
information.
not, yeah, it shouldn't
Such
be.
as phone numbers and the address, by the name and the city of residence is clearly part of the public record.
Right, but I've seen attendance logs where it had
Yeah, right. We can
name and address and name and phone number.
Creating
And
a
Yeah, we
log.
can create some more structure around a template of here's the sign-in sheet, here's, you know what I mean, we need a summary, and generally give them a structure of what that should be like, and then they just kind of fill in the blanks, so we can work towards some of that.
Could you give the developer, do you do it now, where you give the developer a kit, let's say, here's one page, this is how to run the meeting.
We have general, but we can make it a little bit more refined and a little bit more template-like so that they know exactly how to do the sign-in sheet. You know what I mean? It's not to that level of detail yet.
And also how to record notes and things like that, because if staff doesn't go and we don't go, we get their interpretation of what happened at that meeting, and
Although we do eventually get the letters,
Yes.
people that went to the neighborhood meeting will show up at the hearing, and if there's any hanky-panky, let's say, we'll find out about it. Okay,
Yeah, more
misinterpretation.
structure on that. Good points.
Anything else on the staff presentation? Seeing none. I just wanted to go over staff communication, just generally. Sometimes you put out little blurbs about what's going on, upcoming events. I'd like to get that to be a monthly or bi-monthly email that goes out to all commissioners, and of course it's also available to the public. It include pending rezonings, PDs, rezonings, etc. Any kind of zoning amendments, just basically written in kind of a newsletter format to planning commissioners. It keeps us better informed and gets us aware of things that are upcoming. Like I say, you do it sometimes, but it'd be nice to do it on a regular basis.
So are you saying things that come before you, or you're just asking for all applications that have been submitted
I'll
to the
finish my list, basically.
Okay. Yeah, just we can do whatever, I just
Yeah.
need more
Oh, I
structure
understand.
around what the request.
Well, also, any council decisions that have happened that would affect us down the road, or every couple months we find out how did we're advisory to council on such and such a case. How did council vote on that? Sometimes I don't find out about it. So again, just another little what's happening with council. Let's see, any corridor study updates, or mineral station updates, or the zoning code use table updates, what's going on. If nothing's going on, then nothing's going on. But it just gives us, again, a little newsletter quality type of chatty update us to, it keeps us better informed. Let's see. But that was, if you want to do rumors too, that'd be nice to have. Probably. You probably can't do
Probably
that.
know more about rumors than we do, quite frankly, or any of those type of things. Right?
So that's one thing I'd like to see improved with communication with the Planning Commission. Anybody else?
So again, just so I'm understanding, so you're saying that you want to see more information about all land use applications, or just ones that come before you, and then as they continue, if they do to council, and what that outcome is? What does that mean? More information?
Well, more, okay, say the official application has not been made for a project, but you know it's coming. Is it apropos to at least give us some general information, or is that?
Again, I'm saying on what? On everything? Because you don't see all land use applications. So are you saying anything that's been submitted to the
stuff coming
city,
from
or
us.
just to planning commission?
If you want to know what's going on in the city, go to the website, and you have this lovely project
Activity
list.
Yeah.
No.
Okay, so you're just saying the ones that eventually come through to planning commission and or move on to council?
Yeah, it's not citywide, it's a planning commission type of update on what affects us. Okay.
Just
And
again,
it's
just trying
not-
to better understand. Yeah.
You mentioned today you have plenty of time on your hands, but, if it's a half-page email, just tap it out every once in a while. Once you get into the habit, it'll be easy to do.
One thing that we can probably manage through our processes and procedures so we don't forget is something is we can create like a report that we can run through our software that would pull out all the, a monthly kind of submittals that things would come to planning commission or council. There's that, through that CAN mechanism, we can probably create a couple of reports to just get that information to you guys.
Yeah.
I just don't want to forget something, you know what I mean? So that's probably the best way to, from staff, just thinking ahead of how we can manage some of that. But
What we don't need is use by right, and they're building a warehouse and it never comes to us. Go to the website to find out all you want about it. Anyone else on just general communication, or does staff return your phone calls when you're calling on Friday to ask questions? Okay. Any complaints? Is it all seeing none? I guess everybody's happy.
One thing I've noticed is being a new commissioner, there seems to be quite a planning community and events and seminars. Is staffs going to any of those? Are certain ones more beneficial than others? Could there be recommendations to encourage commissioners to attend specific events? There's, seems like there's...
You mean like ULI or something?
Pardon me?
Like Urban Land Institute?
Yeah, and there's local planning
Yeah.
organizations, community planners, meetings that are kind of, some general invites. There was one that I was kind of interested in going to, but I had a conflict. So I was just wondering if there's any that possibly you might want to recommend for...
Well, generally I've been, maybe it's not in a consistent monthly email, but as those come across our desk, and we don't necessarily know all of them, but certainly when there's one that appear to be a good fit for planning commission training, for example, the one that was just held this past weekend in Golden,
Yeah,
was
that
done
was the
through
one I
DOLA.
wanted to go to.
So if you know, I passed that through to you guys, said, hey, does anyone want to sign up? This looks like a good opportunity. And actually, Robin may have come to that, so maybe she could give a quick blurb on how that went. But that's how we've been attempting to manage it. Now, maybe there's ways to improve upon that, but that's generally been...
If you adopt that, like little kind of monthly newsletter, maybe some future upcoming events that...
Again, to the best of our ability,
Right.
I just don't want to overpromise and then we're not, you know what I mean? So really, if you guys also, this has got to be a team effort here, so if there's other trainings that you come across that you're interested in, or you want to get staff's opinion, please feel free to send an email to me and we can work through it, and if it seems like a good one, we can push it out, you know what I mean, to let other commissioners know we gotta do some of that.
I get all the APA emails, and that's where I learn about the things that are coming up. There's several webinars that I've watched, and the webinars are great. You don't actually have to actually be there at the time. If you can't be, sign up for them and they send you it and you can watch it. I've signed up to other, like the Heart and Soul, and I get their webinars. And there's really interesting things that I find very appropriate for what we're doing, but it's just because I get the emails. So I don't know if you're getting into the emails.
Yeah, I'm getting those too.
Yeah.
I haven't really delved into it much.
They tell a lot of different events, different webinars. They're actually quite extensive, and they let you know whether they're free or not, and they give a good description to them. Then some of them are just on the different events that are coming up. I find them really helpful.
Usually there's also through the Colorado Municipal League, they oftentimes, not every year, but every few years, they seem to do a training for planning commission. So, you know, as we know of that, we definitely try to make sure that you guys are all aware of that.
That'd be helpful.
The trainings that I've gone to through Littleton have been very good. I mean, and been, you know, and it's good that the city covers most of them.
Yeah, so that we can. And then, you know, honestly, the other thing too is if there's something that seems like really interesting and you want to say, hey, do you think you can get this, whatever this is, to do a presentation at one of Littleton's study sessions? I mean, I'm open to that too, as far as, hey, could we do a study session on X, or, you know what I mean, and try to manage it that way and bring some trainings to us specifically. Happy to do that. I can work with the chair and vice chair on some of what that might be, other organizations. We've had some in the past, but, you know, there's probably more out there we could look at as well.
Anything else to add? Jocelyn, anything else to add?
The thing we're working on now is bringing back to you your legal training part 2, if you will. So one of the September meetings, we'll try to get that on your agenda. And then not to put Robin on the spot, but, you know, it might be if she's got just a highlight of, you know, since she did just go to the planning commissioner training, it was in Golden this past weekend, maybe she kind of give us some of those. Maybe those are some things that we write on our list as well.
So in the morning, we had Chris Akers from DOLA, and he gave a demographics trend. Though he spoke like lightning, you could catch what he was saying. All the slides, they're sending us all the slides. If anyone's interested, I can pass on the slides. The thing that I found most interesting from that is it says that Colorado's population and income growth is actually slowing. Aging is really impacting everything. And Littleton's population growth is about 0.7. That's what they're anticipating, and that's actually at the lower end. And the job growth is on the Front Range and the mountain resort areas, and everywhere else is really hurting compared to, but where the job growth is the Front Range. I think that's probably stuff we already knew. Then we had a session on affordable housing, which actually was very fascinating. We had it from different points of view. DOLA came in and expanded upon what they do. Don Elliott from Clarion Associates came in and really discussed how can you incorporate that in your codes. And then Longmont came in and said, this is how we have done it with our codes, because they just went through a comp plan. I wanted to ask her, we didn't have enough time. It was really rushed in the sense that you didn't have a lot of time to ask questions because there was so much information coming out from the speakers, but I wanted to ask her how they incorporated their community character in this aspect when they were also including in their affordable housing. But I'll get her information. I was going to email her on that. What I enjoyed the best was the afternoon. They had Gerald Dahl, who is a lawyer, come in, who with lots of experience with planning commissioners, and so he went through a lot of the different processes. Just what's the role of the commissioner, the hearings, the meetings, but then he would give lots of examples about what he's seen you shouldn't do, you know, and what you should do, and that was interesting. But the last part was he gave us a list of scenarios, and we had to decide what was the appropriate approach to do them. So you discuss amongst your group, and then, you know, you say, okay, tell us what you thought. That was, of course, the most eye-opening because you really get down into the nuts and bolts. And of course, they're all great. there's nothing there that would jump out at you, this is the right way to do it. You really had to understand it and study it. And I found that really exceptionally helpful because it makes you start thinking about these different scenarios to be able to apply them when they come up in front of you. And there was about 7 of them, and then there was a little bit time left where other planning commissioners would come and say, these are some of the things we've seen happen. And we'd walk through that, and people would say, well, that was good, that wasn't so good, and that was very helpful. That was my favorite part. And you'd like to know, Steve, he really agreed a lot with everything you said, so. It was it was like, oh, I just heard this. This is exactly what we were just told. Good.
Nice. Keeps the confusion a little down.
It helped. Well, for me, being new, it was like, okay, I've heard it once, now I've heard it twice. Now I should remember it.
By the way, a nice thing to add maybe to legal part 2 would be just what Robin was saying. It's fun. Just you have 7 or 10 scenarios. Okay, applicant comes in, or you go to the job site, you're intercepted by an applicant or by a property owner who starts quizzing you. What do you do? There's more complicated
Yeah, we're
ones
going
than
to
that.
focus, so legal part 2 is going to be much more about how do I be a planning commissioner?
Yep.
And so much more hands-on advice as to being a successful planning commissioner, both from a legal standpoint as well as from a planning standpoint.
But give us a pop quiz and see how we do. Pick a deal.
There may be a pop quiz of some kind. I don't know. We will have, but there will be definitely a different component than the last one.
Thank you. And if you get the slides, if you want to send them to me, then I can distribute to everyone.
Yes.
And we can
Yeah, they
also
did send
put it
them
up
to me.
on our.
And you were going to send along the slides that we had from the previous meeting with the
Yes, yes, it's
On the to-do list.
We will definitely get that done before we have the next meeting.
Thanks.
Sorry, it's taking so long.
Any other commissioner comments? Seeing none, I think we are adjourned.
Do we have anything immediate coming up? Just,
No problem.
We did have a tentative case for your next meeting, but I believe as of today that just got pushed back. So we're working on when the legal training will happen, either the next meeting or the second one. The one thing to note, your regularly scheduled first meeting in September coincides with council budget discussion. So that meeting won't happen on the 11th. We were tentatively putting it on to the next Monday, which was the 18th.
2 Mondays in a row then, right?
Right.
That was my-
Potentially, yes. Yep. So if we don't have a hearing case, we'd probably have more flexibility there, but we'll definitely be in touch relative to when the legal training, because we did get that scheduled here soon.
That's a difficult day for me. I already got 2 meetings scheduled at that time frame.
The 18th.
Yeah, I won't be able to make it.
That's a hard one for me.
So we may just not have that first meeting and just have the second meeting in September on the legal training.
Can I get a brief? Anyone who cannot attend on the 18th for sure would be John, Lynn, and Robin.
Getting down there to bare minimum, okay.
Well, I mean, that is not a regularly scheduled
Yeah.
meeting, so understandable, but you'd have other things planned.
Little leeway there, okay. Just this one time.
But if there's not a hearing case, really, we do have more flexibility, so, okay.
Thank you all.
Great, all right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
play their little games and never think to blink and take the time to survey the destination of the generation, and this nation's future's looking just a little bit gray. All we do is think of ourselves and money we